The dust-choked road stretched endlessly before Valerie Vaughan as she stumbled forward, her once fine boots worn through at the soles and her stomach cramping with 4 days of emptiness. The setting sun cast long shadows across the barren Wyoming landscape of 1876, turning the distant town of Promise Creek into a mirage of hope that seemed to retreat with each desperate step she took. Valerie clutched the tattered remains of her reticule, containing nothing but a broken pocket watch that had belonged to her father and a crumpled photograph of parents long since buried in a Philadelphia cemetery. The stagecoach robbery 3 days prior had left her with nothing else, no money, no food, and no future in this unforgiving territory. Her legs wobbled beneath her as she finally reached the outskirts of town. The faint sounds of a piano drifted from the saloon, mingling with raucous laughter and the occasional shout. Valerie had never imagined herself in such a place. 6 months ago, she'd been teaching etiquette to young ladies in Boston, living a respectable if modest life. Now, she was simply trying to survive. "Just keep walking," she whispered to herself, her throat parched and voice raspy. "Someone will help. Someone must help." The main street of Promise Creek bustled with evening activity. Men in dusty clothes moved in and out of the general store, saloon, and sheriff's office. A few women in calico dresses hurried to finish their errands before nightfall. No one paid attention to the bedraggled young woman who leaned against a hitching post, fighting to remain upright. The aroma of cooking meat from the nearby hotel dining room made Valerie's stomach contract painfully. She closed her eyes, trying to will away the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. When she opened them again, she found herself staring into the deepest blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Madam, are you all right?" The man's voice was low and gentle, with a hint of concern that brought unexpected tears to Valerie's eyes. "I'm fine, thank you," she managed, straightening her spine as her mother had taught her. Ladies did not show weakness, even when starving. The stranger, tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and wheat-colored hair beneath his worn Stetson, narrowed his eyes. "Begging your pardon, but you don't look fine." Valerie opened her mouth to protest again, but the world suddenly tilted. She felt herself falling, powerless to stop it, until strong arms caught her. "Whoa there," the man said, steadying her. "When's the last time you ate, madam?" The kindness in his voice broke something inside her. 4 days ago, she whispered, unable to maintain the pretense any longer. "The stagecoach was robbed. They took everything." The man's jaw tightened. "That'd be the Hanson gang. 3rd robbery this month." He looked down at her, his expression softening. "I'm Yates Vance. Most folks call me Yates." "Valerie Vaughan," she replied, fighting to maintain consciousness. "Miss Vaughan, I'd be honored if you'd join me for supper." He gestured toward the hotel. "The Galloping Horse serves the best food in 3 counties. Pride warred with hunger. "I couldn't possibly accept. I have no way to repay you, Mr. Vance." A smile touched his lips, transforming his weathered face. "Just Yates, please. And there's no debt. Just the pleasure of your company." He offered his arm. "Eat beside me tonight, Miss Vaughan. No strings attached." Valerie hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling hand on his offered arm. "Just tonight," she agreed, not knowing those words would mark the beginning of a journey neither of them had anticipated. The Galloping Horse Hotel's dining room was modest but clean, with kerosene lamps casting a warm glow over the half-dozen tables. A few traveling salesmen occupied one corner, while the local banker and his wife sat near the window. When Yates guided Valerie to a table in the back, several patrons glanced their way with undisguised curiosity. "Don't mind them," Yates said quietly as he held her chair. "Folks in small towns are always hungry for something new to talk about." A plump woman in an apron approached their table, her eyebrows rising slightly at Valerie's disheveled appearance. "Evening, Yates. Who's your friend?" "Mrs. Holbrook. This is Miss Valerie Vaughan. She had some trouble on the road." The subtle emphasis he placed on his words made the woman's expression shift to sympathy. "Hanson gang again?" When Yates nodded, Mrs. Holbrook clicked her tongue. "Shameful business. Well, miss, you're safe now." What can I bring you folks? Whatever's hot and plentiful, Yates answered, and some of that apple pie for after if there's any left. For you, I'll make sure there is. Mrs. Holbrook smiled and bustled away. Left alone with her rescuer, Valerie studied him properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with laugh lines around his eyes and a small scar near his right temple. His hands were calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living, but they were clean, his nails neatly trimmed. You're not from around here, he observed, breaking the silence. Valerie shook her head. Boston originally, most recently Philadelphia. That's quite a journey. What brings you to Wyoming Territory? Before Valerie could answer, Mrs. Holbrook returned with a basket of fresh bread and 2 steaming bowls of stew. The rich aroma made Valerie's mouth water. But she forced herself to remember her manners, unfolding her napkin and placing it in her lap. Go on, Yates urged, seeing her hesitation. It's not going anywhere. Valerie took a small spoonful, trying to maintain her composure, but the moment the savory broth touched her tongue, dignity fled. She ate with desperate focus, barely aware of Yates watching her with a mixture of concern and amusement. Only when she had finished the entire bowl and 2 pieces of bread did she realize how ravenously she had consumed the meal. Heat flooded her cheeks. I apologize for my lack of decorum. Yates waved away her embarrassment. No need for fancy words or manners here. Hunger's hunger. He pushed his own half-eaten bread toward her. Have mine too. I've already eaten more than my share today. She knew he was lying to preserve her pride, and the kindness of it brought a lump to her throat. Thank you. As she ate the bread, he refilled her water glass. Now, what brings a Boston lady to our little corner of nowhere? A teaching position, Valerie explained. At least, that was the plan. I answered an advertisement for a schoolteacher in Copper Ridge. The town council sent train fare as far as Cheyenne, and I was to take the stagecoach the rest of the way. Copper Ridge is about 50 miles northwest of here, Yates said with a frown. When were you expected? Yesterday. Valerie's shoulders slumped. I had a letter of introduction and all my credentials in my trunk, along with everything I own in the world. The robbers took it all. Mrs. Holbrook returned with 2 slices of apple pie and cups of coffee. Here you go, dears. Enjoy. When she had gone, Yates leaned forward. Sheriff Ellis might be able to help. He's been tracking the Hanson gang for months now. Hope flickered briefly in Valerie's chest before dying. Even if he found them, I doubt they've kept my things. Papers would be worthless to them. She stared into her coffee, the bitter reality of her situation settling over her. Without my credentials, no school board will hire me. I have no money, no references, nothing. Promise Creek has a school, Yates said thoughtfully, but no teacher since old Miss Pritchard died last winter. The children have been running wild for months. Valerie looked up, a spark of interest igniting despite her exhaustion. Is there a school board? Someone I could speak with? Mayor Jenkins handles most town business, along with Reverend Cole and a few others. Yates took a sip of his coffee. I could introduce you tomorrow if you'd like. That's very kind, but, Valerie faltered, I have nowhere to stay tonight, and no means to pay for lodging. Yates considered this problem for a moment. Mrs. Holbrook has rooms upstairs. I'm sure she'd let you stay on credit until you get settled. She's always saying this town needs more respectable women. The word respectable made Valerie's spine straighten. That was what she had always been, respectable, proper, following the rules of society. Even now, hungry and desperate as she was, she clung to that identity. I couldn't possibly be indebted to strangers, she began, but Yates cut her off with a gentle shake of his head. Out here, we understand that sometimes folks need a helping hand. There's no shame in accepting it. His blue eyes held hers steadily. Tomorrow, you'll talk to the mayor about the teaching position. Tonight, you'll sleep in a real bed and not worry about anything else. All right? Valerie wanted to argue, to insist on her independence, but fatigue and practicality won out. All right, she agreed softly. Thank you, Mr. Vance. Yates, he corrected with a smile. And you're welcome. Miss Vaughan. Valerie, she offered in return, surprising herself. His smile widened, causing an unexpected flutter in her chest. Valerie, he repeated, as if testing how her name felt on his tongue. Eat your pie before it gets cold. Mrs. Holbrook will be offended if you don't finish every crumb. Valerie complied, savoring the sweet-spiced apples and flaky crust. As her stomach filled and her immediate fears receded, she found herself studying Yates Vance again. There was something comforting about his presence, steady, reliable, like the solid ground beneath her feet after days of uncertainty. "What do you do in Promise Creek?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her. "I have a ranch about 5 miles outside town," he answered. "Nothing fancy, about 100 head of cattle, some horses, enough to keep me busy and fed." He drained his coffee cup. "I come into town every Friday for supplies and to hear whatever news has made its way out here." "Do you live alone?" The question slipped out before Valerie could consider its propriety. If Yates was offended, he didn't show it. "Just me and my foreman, Charlie Mendoza. He's been with me since I bought the place 6 years ago. Then there's Cookie, who feeds us, and a couple of ranch hands who help with the cattle." He shrugged. "It's a simple life, but a good one." Valerie tried to imagine it wide open spaces, freedom from the constraints of city life, the satisfaction of working the land. It was so far removed from her own experience that it seemed almost like a fiction from one of the dime novels her students had sometimes smuggled into class. "It sounds lovely," she said honestly. "It can be." His expression grew wistful. "Though sometimes the quiet gets to be too much. That's when I find excuses to come to town." Mrs. Holbrook approached their table again. "All finished?" "How was everything?" "Perfect as always, Mrs. H," Yates assured her. "Mrs. Holbrook," Valerie began hesitantly, "Mr. Vance mentioned you might have a room available. I find myself without accommodations for the night." The older woman's eyes softened. "Of course, dear. I've got a nice room at the back, away from the street noise." She glanced at Yates. "Will you be vouching for the lady, Yates?" "Yes, madam," he said without hesitation. "Miss Vaughan is here to speak with Mayor Jenkins about taking over the teaching position. She'll be able to settle her bill once that's arranged." Mrs. Holbrook beamed. "A teacher. That's wonderful news. My grandchildren have been running positively wild since Miss Pritchard passed. I'll have Betsy prepare the room right away." She patted Valerie's shoulder. "You rest up, dear. Teaching the children of Promise Creek will require all your strength, believe me." After she bustled away, Valerie turned to Yates. "You seem very confident the mayor will hire me." "Promise Creek is desperate for a teacher," Yates replied, "and you strike me as a determined woman who knows her business." Even without credentials or references, Yates leaned back in his chair. "Out here, we judge people by what we see, not by papers. You carry yourself like someone who's used to keeping order in a classroom. The rest is just details." His confidence in her was both flattering and unnerving. "I hope you're right." "I usually am," he said with a grin that transformed his face, making him look boyish despite the weathered lines around his eyes. "Now, would you like me to show you around town tomorrow? It won't take long. Promise Creek isn't exactly Chicago." The offer was tempting, but Valerie hesitated. She had already accepted too much from this stranger. "I wouldn't want to impose further on your time." "It's no imposition. I need to visit the general store anyway." His expression grew more serious. "Unless you'd prefer to find your own way. I understand if you would." Valerie considered her options. In truth, having a local guide would be invaluable, especially one who seemed to know everyone in town. "If you're certain it's no trouble, I would appreciate the company." "Good." He stood, placing money on the table to cover their meal. "I'll call for you at 9 tomorrow morning, if that suits." "That would be fine. Thank you again, Mr. Yates." He tipped his hat. "My pleasure, Valerie. Sleep well." As he walked away, Valerie realized she was smiling for the first time in days. Despite the hardships that had brought her to this moment, despite the uncertainty of her future, something about Yates Vance made her feel that perhaps everything might turn out all right after all. That night, lying in the clean, if simple bed in Mrs. Holbrook's hotel, Valerie found her thoughts returning repeatedly to the kind cowboy with the blue eyes. It was foolish, she knew, to feel such gratitude and warmth toward a man she had just met, especially one so different from the gentleman she had known back east. Yet there was something about Yates Vance that seemed more genuine than all the polished manners and practiced gallantry of Philadelphia's eligible bachelors. He had seen her at her lowest, hungry, disheveled, desperate, and had offered help without judgment or expectation. "Don't be ridiculous," she whispered to herself in the darkness. He was simply being kind to a stranger in need, that's all. But as sleep finally claimed her, Valerie's dreams were filled with blue eyes and a gentle voice saying, "Eat beside me tonight." Morning arrived with the sounds of Promise Creek coming to life, wagons rumbling down the main street, shopkeepers opening their establishments, the blacksmith's hammer ringing against his anvil. Valerie woke feeling refreshed, but immediately anxious about her appearance. Her travel dress was wrinkled and stained from days on the road, and she had no other clothes to change into. A soft knock at the door interrupted her fretting. When she opened it, she found a young girl of about 14 standing there with a bundle in her arms. "Morning, miss. I'm Betsy, Mrs. Holbrook's helper. She sent these up for you." The girl thrust the bundle forward. "Said you might need something fresh to wear." Valerie accepted the offering with surprise. "That's very thoughtful. Please thank Mrs. Holbrook for me." "Yes'm." Betsy bobbed a quick curtsy. "There's hot water for washing in the kitchen if you want it. Breakfast is served until 8:30. After the girl left, Valerie unwrapped the bundle to find a simple calico dress in a soft blue color, along with clean undergarments and a hairbrush. The dress would be slightly large on her frame, but it was clean and whole, a vast improvement over her current state. 20 minutes later, washed and dressed in the borrowed clothes, with her dark hair neatly braided and pinned, Valerie made her way downstairs. The dining room was busier than it had been the previous evening, with several tables occupied by travelers and locals alike. Mrs. Holbrook spotted her immediately and hurried over. "There you are, dear. The dress fits well enough, I see. It belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Cheyenne." "It's perfect, Mrs. Holbrook. I can't thank you enough for your kindness." The older woman waved away her gratitude. "Nonsense. We take care of our own here in Promise Creek." "But I'm not." "You will be," Mrs. Holbrook said with certainty. "Now, sit and have some breakfast. You're still too thin by half." Valerie obeyed, settling at a small table near the window. As she ate the hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits with gravy, she watched the town coming to life outside. Promise Creek was smaller than she had anticipated, just one main street with perhaps 20 buildings, including the hotel, general store, saloon, and what appeared to be a combination church and schoolhouse at the far end. It was nothing like the bustling cities she had known all her life, yet there was something appealing about its simplicity. People greeted each other by name as they passed on the boardwalk. A man tipped his hat to every woman he encountered. Children raced down the street, their laughter floating on the morning air. Precisely at 9 o'clock, the hotel door opened, and Yates Vance stepped inside. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance. His shirt was crisp, his hair neatly combed, and his boots polished. He removed his hat as he entered, scanning the room until his gaze found Valerie. The smile that spread across his face when he saw her caused an unexpected warmth to bloom in her chest. "Good morning," he said, approaching her table. "You look rested." Valerie returned his smile. "I feel much better, thank you. Mrs. Holbrook has been extraordinarily kind." "She's a good woman." Yates glanced at her empty plate. "Ready for a tour of our metropolis? It shouldn't take more than about 15 minutes. His self-deprecating humor made her laugh. "I'd be delighted." Outside, the morning sun had burned away the chill of night, promising a warm day ahead. Yates offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Valerie placed her hand upon it. The solid strength beneath her fingers was reassuring. "Main Street is about all there is to see," Yates explained as they walked. "General store there, Mr. Abernethy owns it. Post office is inside, too. Next door is the barber shop. Doc Wilson's office is behind it. He's also the town dentist and sometimes veterinarian." "A man of many talents," Valerie observed. "Necessity out here," Yates agreed. "The saloon you know to avoid, Not that the Silver Spur is worse than most, but it's no place for a lady. Sheriff's office is across the street. Ellis is a good man, fair-minded. You should talk to him about the robbery when you have a chance." They continued down the street, Yates pointing out the various businesses and introducing Valerie to people they encountered. Everyone was polite, if curious, and several expressed enthusiasm when Yates mentioned she might become the new teacher. "School's at the end of the street," he said, guiding her toward the white clapboard building with a small bell tower. "Church services on Sundays, school during the week. There are about 20 children of school age in town and from the surrounding farms." As they approached the building, a tall, thin man in a black suit emerged from the door. "Reverend Cole," Yates called out. "Good morning." The minister looked up, his stern expression softening slightly. "Mr. Vance, what brings you to the Lord's house on a Saturday?" "I'd like you to meet Miss Valerie Vaughan," Yates said. "She's interested in the teaching position." Reverend Cole's pale eyes assessed Valerie. "Is that so? We've had several inquiries, though none from candidates who actually appeared in person." Valerie straightened her spine, falling back on years of training in proper etiquette. "I believe in the value of education, Reverend. I taught for 3 years at the Boston Ladies' Academy before taking a position with a private family in Philadelphia." "Impressive credentials," the Reverend said, though his tone suggested skepticism. "Do you have references?" "Unfortunately, my belongings were stolen during a stagecoach robbery on my way here," Valerie explained. "I was originally headed to Copper Ridge, but circumstances have changed my plans." The minister's eyebrows rose. "I see. Well, the school board consisting of myself, Mayor Jenkins, and Mrs. Abernethy would need to interview you properly. We have certain standards for whoever shapes the minds of our young people." "Of course," Valerie agreed. "I would welcome the opportunity to discuss my qualifications." "The mayor is usually at his office, the building next to the general store, until noon on Saturdays," Reverend Cole said. "You might call on him today. If he's amenable, we could convene the board this evening." "Thank you, Reverend. I'll do that." As they walked away, Valerie could feel the minister's eyes on her back. "He seems formidable," she murmured to Yates. "Cole's all right. Bit strict in his views, but he means well." Yates guided her toward a modest building with mayor's office painted on the door. "Jenkins is more easygoing. He owns the livery stable at the edge of town, so he's usually more concerned with horses than moral standards." Valerie smoothed her borrowed dress and touched her hair nervously. "Do I look presentable enough to meet the mayor?" Yates stopped, turning to face her. His eyes, so blue in the morning light, seemed to take in every detail of her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The unexpected compliment left Valerie momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, Yates had opened the door to the mayor's office and was ushering her inside. Mayor Jenkins proved to be exactly as Yates had described, a ruddy-faced, heavy-set man more interested in practical matters than formalities. After a brief introduction and explanation of Valerie's situation, he leaned back in his creaking chair and stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "We need a teacher, that's certain. The children are falling behind, and some of the farmers are threatening to send their older boys to school in Rawlins if we don't find someone soon." He studied Valerie. "You say you taught in Boston?" "Yes, sir, for 3 years. And you can handle a classroom full of ranch kids who'd rather be riding than reading?" Valerie smiled. "I once managed 25 young ladies who believed they were too wealthy and important to learn mathematics. I suspect ranch children might actually be more motivated." The mayor chuckled. "Fair point." He glanced at Yates. "You're vouching for her, Vance?" "I am," Yates said without hesitation. "Good enough for me, then. Cole will want his say, of course, and Mrs. Abernethy will have questions about your moral character, but I'm inclined to offer you the position." Jenkins leaned forward. "Pays $40 a month. Town provides the schoolhouse and basic supplies. You'd board with a local family. The Wilsons have a spare room since their daughter married. It's not much, but it's honest work." $40 a month was less than half what she had earned in Boston, but Valerie understood that teaching on the frontier would be different in many ways. "When would you want me to start?" "Monday," the mayor said promptly. No sense wasting more time. The children have already lost half a year. Monday, Valerie repeated, a mixture of excitement and trepidation filling her. Yes, I believe I could be ready by then. Excellent, Jenkins stood, extending his hand to shake hers, a gesture rarely offered to women in the East, but one Valerie appreciated for its straightforwardness. Meet with Cole and Mrs. Abernethy this evening, say, 7 o'clock at the schoolhouse. If they don't find any reason to object, consider yourself hired. Outside again, Valerie felt slightly dazed by how quickly events were moving. That was efficient. Yates laughed. Jenkins doesn't believe in wasting time. It's one of his better qualities. He glanced at the sky. It's nearly noon. Would you join me for lunch before I need to head back to the ranch? The invitation was tempting, but Valerie hesitated. You've already done so much. I shouldn't impose further. It's not an imposition, Yates said softly. I enjoy your company. The simple honesty in his voice made Valerie's resolve waver. All right, thank you. They returned to the hotel dining room, where Mrs. Holbrook greeted them with obvious approval. After they were seated and had ordered, Yates leaned forward, his expression serious. There's something else you should know about Promise Creek before you decide to stay, he said. Valerie's stomach tightened. What is it? The winters are harsh. Snow can cut us off from the larger towns for weeks at a time. The schoolhouse has a good stove, but you'll need proper clothes, supplies laid in. He hesitated. And people get lonely. It's not like the East, where you have theaters and lectures and social gatherings. Out here, it's just us. Valerie considered his warning. I understand isolation, Mr. Vance. I've spent the last 2 years living in someone else's home, teaching their children, with 1 half-day off per week. I had books for company, but little else. She smiled faintly. At least here, I would be my own mistress with a role in the community. Yates studied her face. You're a surprising woman, Valerie Vaughan. How so? Most Eastern ladies I've met would be climbing the walls to get back to civilization by now, but you seem adaptable. Valerie thought about her life in Philadelphia, the rigid schedules, the constant supervision of her charges, the careful maintenance of proper behavior at all times. There had been comfort in that structure, but also a kind of invisible cage. Perhaps I'm ready for something different, she said finally. Something real. Their food arrived, interrupting the moment of connection that had passed between them. As they ate, the conversation turned to lighter topics, Yates describing his ranch and the characters who worked for him, Valerie sharing amusing anecdotes from her teaching days. Cookie, that's what we call our cook. Though his real name is Herbert Sullivan, he makes these biscuits that are hard as rocks, Yates was saying. Charlie swears he saw one bounce when it fell off the table, but Cookie's been with me since I bought the place, and I haven't the heart to tell him to change his recipe. Valerie laughed. Perhaps he needs a few lessons. I'm quite good at baking. Is that so? Yates's eyes twinkled. You'll have to prove that claim someday. The casual reference to a future acquaintance sent an unexpected thrill through Valerie. Perhaps I will. All too soon, Yates glanced at the clock on the wall and sighed. I need to get back. The cattle won't feed themselves, and Charlie will be wondering what's keeping me. Of course, Valerie tried to hide her disappointment. Thank you for everything, the meal, the tour, the introduction to Mayor Jenkins. I don't know what I would have done without your help. You'd have managed, Yates said with certainty. You strike me as a woman who finds a way. He hesitated. But I'm glad I was there. As they stood to leave, Yates reached into his pocket and withdrew a small pouch. I know you'll get paid at the end of the month, but you'll need things before then. Please take this as an advance on your salary. Pride warred with practicality in Valerie's mind. I couldn't possibly. You need clothes, personal items, Yates interrupted gently. Things a lady shouldn't have to go without. Consider it a loan if you must, but please accept it. The sincerity in his eyes made refusal impossible. Thank you, Valerie said, accepting the pouch. I'll repay you as soon as I can. No rush, he smiled. I know where to find you. Outside the hotel, they paused awkwardly. Valerie wasn't sure what the proper etiquette was for saying goodbye to a man who had essentially rescued her from destitution. Yates solved the dilemma by extending his hand. "Good luck with the school board tonight, though I don't think you'll need it." Valerie placed her hand in his, expecting a brief handshake. Instead, Yates held it for a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. "Will I see you again?" she asked impulsively. "Count on it," he answered, his voice low. "I come to town every Friday, remember? And I've got a sudden interest in checking on the education of Promise Creek's youth." The warmth in his gaze made Valerie's breath catch. "Friday, then." "Friday," he agreed, releasing her hand reluctantly. "Take care of yourself, Valerie Vaughan." She watched him walk down the street toward the livery stable, his tall figure cutting a striking silhouette against the afternoon sky. Only when he had disappeared from view did she realize she was still clutching the pouch of money in her hand and that her heart was beating much faster than usual. That evening, dressed in her borrowed blue dress and with her hair neatly arranged, Valerie faced the school board in the one-room schoolhouse. The oil lamps cast long shadows across the simple desks and bare walls as she answered questions about her educational philosophy, teaching methods, and personal background. Reverend Cole was particularly interested in her religious views and moral character. "We expect our teacher to set an example for the children," he emphasized. "Regular church attendance is mandatory, as is abstention from alcohol and gambling. There must be no hint of impropriety in your conduct." "I assure you, Reverend, I was raised with similar values," Valerie replied calmly. "My father was a deacon in our church in Boston." Mrs. Abernathy, a sharp-eyed woman with iron-gray hair, had practical concerns. "Can you manage boys as well as girls? Some of our older students are nearly grown men, and they can be challenging." "I believe in firm but fair discipline," Valerie said. "Children respond to clear expectations and consistent consequences. I've found that even the most resistant students will engage when the material is presented in a way that relates to their lives." Mayor Jenkins, who had been mostly silent during the interview, finally spoke up. "What do you expect from the town, Miss Vaughan?" "Teachers don't usually stay long in places like Promise Creek. They get married or they get homesick for city conveniences. What would keep you here?" It was a perceptive question, one that made Valerie pause. What would keep her in this dusty, isolated town? She thought of Boston, of Philadelphia cities filled with culture and opportunity, but also with rigid social hierarchies and limited options for women like her. "I believe in the importance of education," she said slowly. "Not just reading and arithmetic, but the kind of learning that opens minds and creates possibilities. In a place like Promise Creek, I could make a real difference." She met the mayor's gaze directly. "As for what would keep me here, the chance to build something lasting, to be part of a community where I'm needed. That's worth more than city conveniences." The three board members exchanged glances. Mayor Jenkins nodded slightly, while Mrs. Abernathy's stern expression softened. Even Reverend Cole seemed mollified. "Well said, Miss Vaughan," the mayor announced. "I believe we've heard enough to make our decision." The deliberation took less than 5 minutes. When they returned to the main room, Mayor Jenkins extended his hand. "Welcome to Promise Creek, Miss Vaughan. The teaching position is yours, effective immediately. Mrs. Wilson has agreed to board you and you can move in tomorrow. School will begin Monday morning at 8 o'clock sharp." Relief and excitement washed over Valerie. "Thank you for this opportunity. I won't let you down." As she walked back to the hotel in the gathering dusk, Valerie felt a curious sense of rightness. 24 hours ago, she had been starving and desperate, facing an uncertain future in a strange land. Now she had a position, a purpose, and a place to live. And somewhere, 5 miles outside of town, there was a blue-eyed rancher who believed in her. Valerie smiled to herself as she climbed the hotel steps. Perhaps fate had a plan for her after all. Sunday dawned clear and bright. Valerie awoke early, eager to begin her new life. Mrs. Holbrook had directed her to the general store, where she could spend some of the money Yates had given her on necessities before moving to the Wilson home. Mr. Abernathy, the storekeeper, greeted her warmly. My wife told me all about you, Miss Vaughan. We're mighty pleased to have a proper teacher again. What can I help you with today? Valerie consulted the list she had made the night before. I need some basic clothing items, toiletries, and teaching supplies if you have them. We've got what you need, though the selection isn't what you'd find back east, Mr. Abernethy warned. For the fancier items, you'd have to order from our catalog or visit Rollins. Over the next hour, Valerie selected several simple dresses, undergarments, a warm shawl, sturdy boots, and personal items. Mr. Abernethy directed her to a shelf of books and school supplies at the back of the store. Miss Pritchard ordered these before she passed, he explained. Readers, primers, chalk, slates, the basics. The school board will cover the cost of those. By midday, Valerie had completed her shopping and arranged for her purchases to be delivered to the Wilson home. She then made her way to the small church for Sunday services, where she was introduced to the congregation by Reverend Cole. Our prayers for a new teacher have been answered, he announced from the pulpit. Miss Valerie Vaughan comes to us from the East with experience and dedication. Let us welcome her into our community and support her efforts to educate our children. After the service, Valerie found herself surrounded by curious parents and excited children. Mrs. Wilson, a motherly woman in her 50s, took her arm possessively. You'll be staying with us, dear, she said. We have a lovely room that used to belong to our daughter, Emily. She married a rancher from near Laramie last year. Dr. Wilson, a tall man with kind eyes and graying hair, stood beside his wife. We're delighted to have you, Miss Vaughan. Our home is yours for as long as you wish to stay. Thank you both, Valerie said sincerely. I'm grateful for your hospitality. As the crowd dispersed, Valerie found herself scanning the churchyard, searching for a familiar tall figure. But Yates was nowhere to be seen. Looking for someone? Mrs. Wilson asked perceptively. Valerie felt heat rise to her cheeks. I was just taking in the scene. Mrs. Wilson smiled knowingly, but didn't press the issue. Come along, dear. I've got Sunday dinner waiting, and you look like you could use a good meal. The Wilson home was a comfortable 2-story house behind the doctor's office. Valerie's room was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a small writing desk, and a window that looked out over a kitchen garden. It's lovely, Valerie told Mrs. Wilson sincerely. Make yourself at home, the older woman said. Dinner will be ready in about half an hour. The washroom is at the end of the hall if you'd like to freshen up. Left alone, Valerie unpacked her few new possessions, arranging them carefully in the drawers. The simple act of putting things away in a space that was now hers, however temporarily, gave her a feeling of stability she hadn't experienced since leaving Philadelphia. Dinner with the Wilsons was a pleasant affair. The doctor was well-read and curious about Valerie's background and education. Mrs. Wilson was warm and motherly, pressing second helpings on Valerie and asking gentle questions about her journey west. It must have been terrifying, being robbed like that, Mrs. Wilson commented as she served apple cobbler for dessert. It was, Valerie admitted, but in a strange way, it led me here. If the stagecoach hadn't been robbed, I would have continued on to Copper Ridge. Everything happens for a reason, Mrs. Wilson said with conviction. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Speaking of mysterious ways, Dr. Wilson said, his eyes twinkling, I understand Yates Vance has been showing you around town. Valerie felt her cheeks warm. Mr. Vance was kind enough to help me when I arrived. He introduced me to Mayor Jenkins. Yates is a good man, the doctor said. One of the best in these parts. Built that ranch of his from nothing after coming out here from Missouri about 6 years ago. He's also unmarried, Mrs. Wilson added, ignoring her husband's warning glance. And quite handsome, don't you think? Martha, Dr. Wilson chided, Miss Vaughan has only just arrived. Don't start matchmaking already. I'm merely stating facts, William, Mrs. Wilson replied innocently. Many of the young ladies in town have set their caps for Yates Vance, but he's never shown much interest. Focused on his ranch, he says. Valerie kept her expression neutral despite the unexpected flutter of something like jealousy in her chest. Mr. Vance was very kind to me, but our acquaintance is purely community-minded. Mrs. Wilson exchanged a knowing look with her husband. Of course, dear. More cobbler? That night, lying in her new bed, Valerie found her thoughts drifting to Yates again. She barely knew him, yet he had occupied her mind with surprising frequency since their meeting. There was something about his straightforward manner, his quiet confidence, that appealed to her more than she cared to admit. "This is foolishness," she whispered to herself. "You're here to teach, to build a new life, not to moon over the first kind man you encountered." But as she drifted to sleep, it was Yates's blue eyes and gentle smile that followed her into her dreams. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Valerie dressed carefully in one of her new dresses, a practical brown calico with white collar and cuffs, and pinned her hair in a neat professional style. After a quick breakfast with the Wilsons, she gathered her teaching materials and walked to the schoolhouse. The building was simple but sound, with rows of desks facing a larger teacher's desk on a small platform. Bookshelves lined one wall, a large slate board dominated another, and a pot-bellied stove stood ready for the coming colder weather. Large windows let in plenty of light, and someone, probably Mrs. Abernethy, had placed a vase of wildflowers on the teacher's desk. Valerie was arranging her materials when the first students began to arrive. They entered shyly, curiosity evident in their faces as they assessed their new teacher. By 8 o'clock, 18 children ranging in age from 6 to 16 had taken their seats, watching Valerie with expressions varying from interest to skepticism. "Good morning," she began, projecting confidence she didn't entirely feel. "I am Miss Vaughan, your new teacher. I'm looking forward to getting to know each of you and helping you learn." A small girl in the front row raised her hand tentatively. "Yes?" Valerie encouraged. "Are you going to stay?" the child asked plainly. "Miss Pritchard died, and Mrs. Jenkins only taught us for a week before she said we were impossible." The directness of the question caught Valerie off guard, but she appreciated the honesty. "I plan to stay, yes. Teaching is my vocation." "Do you know what that word means?" Several heads shook. "A vocation is a calling, something you feel meant to do. Teaching is mine." She smiled at the girl. What's your name?" "Sarah Wilson. Dr. Wilson is my PA." "Well, Sarah Wilson, I'm staying at your house so you can help me learn about Promise Creek." Valerie addressed the entire class. "Now, I'd like each of you to tell me your name and one thing you enjoy learning about. Then we'll see where we stand with reading and arithmetic." The morning passed quickly as Valerie assessed her students' abilities and established classroom routines. The children were at varying levels, with some of the farm children having missed substantial schooling due to work demands. But they were generally eager to learn, and by lunchtime, Valerie had begun to form a plan for grouping them according to ability rather than age. As the children ate their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Valerie sat at her desk making notes. The door to the schoolhouse opened, and she looked up, expecting to see a parent or perhaps Reverend Cole checking on her progress. Instead, Yates Vance stood in the doorway, hat in hand and a hesitant smile on his face. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. Valerie's heart did a ridiculous little jump in her chest. "Not at all. The children are having lunch. How's the first day going?" He stepped into the room, looking around with interest. "Better than I expected," Valerie admitted. "They're bright children, though some have fallen behind without regular instruction." "They're lucky to have you." Yates approached her desk, setting a small package wrapped in brown paper on it. "I brought you something. A classroom warming gift, I suppose." Surprised and touched, Valerie unwrapped the package to find a beautiful leather-bound book. "Poems by Emily Dickinson," she read, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "This is lovely." "I saw it in Rawlins last month and bought it on impulse," Yates explained. "I'm not much for poetry myself, but I thought, well, when I met you it seemed like something you might appreciate." The thoughtfulness of the gesture left Valerie momentarily speechless. "Thank you," she finally managed. "I do appreciate it, very much." Yates smiled, the warmth of it reaching his eyes. "I'm glad. I wanted to see how you were settling in. Mrs. Wilson taking good care of you?" "She's been wonderfully kind. Everyone has." Valerie hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "I didn't see you at church yesterday." "Ah." Yates looked slightly embarrassed. I'm not as regular an attendee as Reverend Cole would like. The ranch keeps me busy on Sundays. Cattle don't observe the Sabbath, unfortunately. I understand, Valerie said, though in truth, regular church attendance had been such a fixture in her life that the idea of missing services seemed strange. I'm not irreligious, Yates added, as if sensing her thoughts. Just practical. God and I have an understanding. Before Valerie could respond, the door burst open again, and a flood of children returned from lunch. They skidded to a halt when they saw Yates, curiosity evident in their faces. Mr. Vance, a freckle-faced boy exclaimed, did you bring your horse? Can we see him? Yates laughed. Not today, Tommy. I rode the bay and you know he doesn't like strangers. Are you courting Miss Vaughan? A bold girl of about 12 asked, prompting giggles from her classmates. Valerie felt heat rise to her face. Elizabeth Miller, that's quite enough. Please take your seat. Yates, to his credit, didn't seem embarrassed by the question. I'm just welcoming your new teacher to town. As all good neighbors should, he told the girl with a wink. Now, I should let you get back to your lessons. He turned to Valerie. Friday? He asked quietly. She knew he was referring to their previous arrangement that he came to town on Fridays, but the simple question felt weighted with meaning. Friday, she confirmed. With a tip of his hat to the class, Yates departed, leaving Valerie to face a room full of curious students and her own confused emotions. The rest of the week passed in a blur of lesson planning, teaching, and adjusting to life in Promise Creek. Valerie quickly fell into a routine. Breakfast with the Wilsons, school from 8 until 3, then grading papers or preparing lessons before dinner. In the evenings, she would read from the poetry book Yates had given her or help Mrs. Wilson with household tasks. The townspeople were welcoming, stopping by the schoolhouse to introduce themselves or inviting her to take tea. Mrs. Abernethy, despite her initial sternness, proved to be a valuable ally, donating additional books to the school and offering advice about dealing with certain difficult students. Tommy Jenkins, the mayor's boy, has a quick mind but no discipline, she told Valerie over tea on Wednesday. His mother spoils him, and his father is too busy with town business to notice. He needs a firm hand. Valerie found the advice accurate. By establishing clear expectations and consequences, she had already seen improvement in Tommy's behavior. The other children were responding well too, eager for the structure and attention she provided. By Friday, Valerie felt as though she had been teaching in Promise Creek for months rather than days. The schoolhouse was beginning to feel like her domain, the children like her responsibility. It was a good feeling, a sense of purpose and belonging that had eluded her in her previous positions. As the last student departed that afternoon, Valerie found herself glancing frequently at the clock. Yates had not specified a time, but she assumed he would come to town for supplies and then seek her out, as he had promised. She was tidying the classroom when a knock at the door made her heart skip. But it was Mrs. Wilson who entered, not Yates. There you are, dear, the older woman said. I thought you might like to know that I've invited Yates Vance to dinner this evening. He usually takes his Friday supper at the hotel, but I told him home cooking would do him good. Valerie tried to keep her expression neutral despite the sudden flutter in her stomach. That was thoughtful of you. Mrs. Wilson's eyes twinkled knowingly. Yes, wasn't it? Dinner will be at 6. You might want to wear that blue dress. It brings out your eyes. Before Valerie could protest the obvious matchmaking, Mrs. Wilson had bustled out, leaving her both exasperated and secretly pleased. At 5:45, Valerie stood in front of the small mirror in her room, assessing her appearance. She had indeed chosen the blue dress, telling herself it was simply because it was her newest and nicest option, not because of Mrs. Wilson's suggestion. She had arranged her dark hair more carefully than usual, letting a few soft curls frame her face while keeping the style modest and appropriate. This is ridiculous, she told her reflection. He's just being neighborly. Don't make more of it than it is. But when she descended the stairs and saw Yates standing in the Wilsons' parlor, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt with his best vest, the flutter in her stomach intensified. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the appreciation in his eyes as he took in her appearance made words momentarily unnecessary. "Miss Vaughan," he said finally, his voice warm, "you look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Vance. It's good to see you again." Dr. Wilson cleared his throat, an amused expression on his face. "Shall we go into dinner? Martha has outdone herself tonight." The meal was indeed excellent: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from Mrs. Wilson's garden. The conversation flowed easily, with Dr. Wilson regaling them with tales of frontier medicine and Mrs. Wilson asking Yates about his ranch. "The spring calves are doing well," Yates reported. "If the weather holds, we should have a good harvest, too. The vegetable garden Charlie insisted on planting is actually producing more than Cookie knows what to do with." "You should send some of that bounty home with Valerie," Mrs. Wilson suggested. "Fresh vegetables are always welcome." "I'd be happy to," Yates agreed, glancing at Valerie. "Perhaps you'd like to see the ranch sometime. It's not much, but I'm proud of what we've built." The invitation, offered casually but with an undertone of something more significant, hung in the air between them. Valerie was aware of the Wilsons watching the exchange with barely disguised interest. "I'd like that," she said simply. After dinner, Mrs. Wilson suggested that Yates and Valerie might enjoy a walk in the evening air. "It's such a lovely night," she observed innocently, "and Valerie has been cooped up in that schoolhouse all week." Dr. Wilson shot his wife a knowing look, but added, "Fresh air would do you both good. Just don't wander too far. We've had reports of wolves in the area recently." Outside, the evening was indeed beautiful. The setting sun painted the western sky in shades of orange and pink, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. Valerie and Yates walked in companionable silence for a few minutes, following a well-worn path that led behind the houses to a small creek that gave the town its name. "Mrs. Wilson isn't subtle, is she?" Yates finally said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Valerie laughed. "Not in the slightest. I think she's appointed herself my guardian and matchmaker." "Does that bother you?" His tone was careful, neutral. Valerie considered the question honestly. "It would, if I felt she was pushing me toward someone I didn't," she faltered, suddenly aware of the implication of her words. Yates stopped walking, turning to face her. In the fading light, his expression was difficult to read. "Someone you didn't what, Valerie?" Her heart was beating so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Someone I didn't respect," she finished, choosing the safest word. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Respect is important." They had reached the creek, where a fallen log provided a natural bench. Yates gestured for Valerie to sit, then joined her, keeping a respectful distance between them. "How was your first week of teaching?" he asked, changing the subject. Grateful for the shift to safer territory, Valerie told him about her students, their varying abilities and personalities, and her plans for organizing the curriculum. Yates listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and offering occasional insights about the families she mentioned. "Tommy Jenkins is actually quite good with horses," he noted when Valerie described the mayor's mischievous son. "His father brings him out to the ranch sometimes. The boy has a natural way with animals that he doesn't seem to have with people." "That's useful information," Valerie said. "Perhaps I can incorporate that interest into his lessons somehow." "You're good at this," Yates observed. "Teaching, I mean. You see the children as individuals, not just pupils to be filled with facts." The compliment warmed her. "Thank you. I've always believed education should be tailored to the student when possible." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky and the first stars appear. "I should get you back," Yates said reluctantly. "Dr. Wilson's warning about wolves wasn't just an excuse to get us outside. We've lost a few calves recently." As they walked back toward the Wilson home, Yates hesitantly offered his arm. Valerie took it, acutely aware of his warmth and strength beside her. "Valerie," he said, her name soft on his lips, "would you consider riding out to the ranch with me tomorrow? I could borrow Dr. Wilson's buggy, make a day of it. I'd have you back by supper." The invitation was significant, a deliberate step beyond casual acquaintance toward something more intentional. In Boston or Philadelphia, such an outing would have required a chaperone and would have signaled serious intentions. But this was Wyoming Territory, where different rules applied. And Valerie was surprised to find that she welcomed the difference. "I would like that very much," she answered. Yates' smile in the gathering darkness was like sunrise. "I'll come for you at 9 then." At the Wilsons' front door, they paused awkwardly. In the East, Valerie would have offered her hand for a formal goodbye. But here, standing close to Yates with the night wrapping around them like a shawl, such formality seemed absurd. "Thank you for the walk," she said softly, "and for listening to my teaching stories." "Thank you for sharing them," he replied, his voice equally low. "And for agreeing to visit the ranch tomorrow." For a moment, Valerie thought he might lean forward, might close the small distance between them. Her breath caught at the possibility. But Yates simply reached out and gently tucked a stray curl behind her ear, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. "Good night, Valerie," he whispered. "Good night, Yates," she answered, his given name feeling intimate and right on her tongue. Inside, Mrs. Wilson was waiting in the parlor, pretending to knit but obviously curious. "Did you have a nice walk, dear?" "Very nice," Valerie replied, unable to keep a small smile from her lips. "Mr. Vance has invited me to see his ranch tomorrow." Mrs. Wilson beamed. "How lovely. We'll pack you a picnic lunch. William's buggy is very comfortable, much better than riding horseback in a dress." Valerie laughed. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I'm just looking out for your happiness, dear," Mrs. Wilson said, her expression softening. "You remind me of my Emily, bright, determined, but perhaps a bit too serious sometimes. And Yates is a good man who's been alone too long. If I can help bring two deserving people together, well, that's just doing the Lord's work, isn't it?" There was no arguing with such logic, especially when part of Valerie secretly agreed with the sentiment behind it. "Thank you for your assistance," she said diplomatically, "but please remember that I've only known Mr. Vance for a week. We're still becoming acquainted." Mrs. Wilson's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "Of course, dear. Now, let's talk about what you'll wear tomorrow. The ranch can be dusty, but you'll still want to look your best." Morning brought clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect weather for an outing. Valerie chose a practical but becoming dress in a soft green shade, with a matching bonnet to protect her from the sun. Mrs. Wilson provided a generous picnic basket and numerous pieces of advice. The ranch is about 5 miles east of town. The road is decent, but you'll want a shawl in case the wind picks up, and be sure to see the view from the ridge behind the main house. It's quite spectacular. Dr. Wilson, handing over the reins to his buggy, was more direct. "Yates is an honorable man, Miss Vaughan, but he's still a man. I trust you'll remember your position in the community." "Of course, Dr. Wilson," Valerie assured him, touched by his paternal concern. "We're simply friends." The doctor's raised eyebrow suggested he wasn't convinced, but he nodded. "Enjoy your day, then." Yates arrived precisely at 9, looking more relaxed than Valerie had yet seen him. He wore clean work clothes, denims, a blue shirt, and his usual boots and hat, but had clearly made an effort with his appearance. "Good morning," he greeted her, his smile warm. "Ready for your introduction to ranch life?" "I am," Valerie replied, returning his smile. "Though I should warn you, my experience with animals is limited to house cats and the occasional carriage horse." Yates laughed as he helped her into the buggy. "We'll keep you away from the more spirited livestock. Then..." The journey to the ranch passed quickly, with Yates pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. Valerie found herself relaxing in his company, laughing at his dry humor, and enjoying the beautiful landscape. "That's Promise Creek Ranch," Yates said finally, gesturing toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley ahead. "Not much to look at, but it's home." Valerie thought it looked charming, a main house built of logs with a wide front porch, a large barn, several outbuildings, and corrals containing horses and cattle. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they approached, a dog ran out to greet them, barking enthusiastically. "That's Rusty," Yates explained. "He thinks he runs the place." As the buggy pulled into the yard, a lean, weathered man with dark hair and a mustache emerged from the barn. "Wondered when you'd get here, boss," he called. "Cookie's been fussing about dinner timing." "Charlie Mendoza, my foreman," Yates told Valerie before calling back. "Tell Cookie we brought a picnic. Miss Vaughan wanted to see the ranch." Charlie approached the buggy, removing his hat respectfully when he saw Valerie. "Madam, welcome to Promise Creek Ranch." "Thank you, Mr. Mendoza. It's lovely." Charlie shot an amused glance at Yates. "First time anyone's called this place lovely, but we'll take it." He nodded toward the barn. "That new mare arrived yesterday. Thought you might want to see her." "We will," Yates promised, helping Valerie down from the buggy. "But first, I'd like to show Miss Vaughan around." The tour began with the main house, a surprisingly comfortable dwelling with a large main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while practical furniture and a few homey touches created a welcoming atmosphere. "Cookie's domain," Yates explained, gesturing to the kitchen area where a round, red-faced man was kneading bread dough. "Herbert Sullivan, though no one calls him that." Cookie wiped his hands on his apron and offered a flowery handshake. "Pleased to meet you, madam. Boss hasn't brought a lady to the ranch in, well, ever." Valerie accepted the handshake, charmed by the cook's straightforward manner. "It's a pleasure, Mr. Sullivan. Something smells wonderful." "Just a stew for the hands' dinner," Cookie said, pleased by her compliment. "Nothing fancy." After showing Valerie the rest of the house, including his small office where he kept the ranch accounts and a surprisingly well-stocked bookshelf, Yates led her outside to see the barn, corrals, and various outbuildings. "We run about 100 head of cattle," he explained. "Not a large operation, but we're growing. I started with just 20 head and this land 6 years ago." "You've built something impressive," Valerie said sincerely. "It must have taken tremendous work and determination." "Some days I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life," Yates admitted. "That first winter was brutal. But each year gets a little easier, a little better." He looked around the ranch, pride evident in his face. "It's not much compared to the big spreads, but it's mine. Every log, every fence post, every head of cattle, I worked for it." The quiet passion in his voice moved Valerie. This was a man who had created something from nothing through sheer will and hard work. It was a quality she deeply respected. "Would you like to see that view Mrs. Wilson mentioned?" Yates asked. "It's a short walk up the ridge." "I'd love to." They retrieved the picnic basket from the buggy and set off along a well-worn path that wound up the gentle slope behind the main house. Rusty, the ranch dog, accompanied them, occasionally darting off to investigate interesting scents before returning to their side. The climb was easy, and within 15 minutes they had reached a flat outcropping of rock that provided a perfect vantage point. Below them, the ranch buildings looked like toys, and beyond stretched miles of rolling grassland, distant mountains rising blue on the horizon. "It's breathtaking," Valerie said softly, turning in a slow circle to take in the panoramic view. "This is why I stayed," Yates told her, watching her reaction rather than the view. "That first winter, when everything was going wrong and I was sure I'd die out here, I'd climb up to this spot and look out at all this." He gestured at the vast landscape. "Somehow, it put my troubles in perspective." Valerie understood perfectly. There was something about the immensity of the western sky and land that made human concerns seem manageable by comparison. They spread a blanket on a flat section of the outcropping and unpacked Mrs. Wilson's generous picnic fried chicken, biscuits, apple tarts, and a jug of lemonade. Sitting side by side, they ate and talked, conversation flowing as easily as it had from the beginning of their acquaintance. "How did you become a teacher?" Yates asked as they shared the apple tarts. Valerie smiled at the memory. "I was always the child organizing games for the younger ones, creating lessons, playing school. My father recognized my interest early and encouraged my education." Her smile faded slightly. "When he and my mother died of influenza 6 years ago, teaching became not just a calling, but a necessity. I needed to support myself." "I'm sorry about your parents," Yates said gently. It's hard to lose family. Do you have family back in Missouri? Valerie asked, realizing she knew little about his background. A sister in St. Louis, Yates answered. Married with 3 children now. We write, but I haven't been back since I came west. He looked out at the horizon. My parents died when I was young. My sister raised me, essentially. When she married, I decided it was time to make my own way. And you chose Wyoming Territory. Yates chuckled. Actually, I was headed to California. Got as far as Cheyenne when I ran out of money. Worked on a ranch there for a year, saved up, and was about to continue west when I heard about land for sale near Promise Creek. Somehow the idea of having my own place, building something from scratch, became more appealing than whatever I thought I'd find in California. I'm glad you stopped, Valerie said softly. Yates turned to look at her, his blue eyes intent. So am I. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Valerie was acutely aware of his nearness, of the slight breeze ruffling his wheat-colored hair, of the warmth in his gaze. Valerie, he began, his voice low and serious, I know we haven't known each other long, but A sudden series of barks from Rusty interrupted whatever Yates had been about to say. The dog had been dozing nearby, but was now on his feet, alert and agitated, staring down the slope toward the ranch. Yates was immediately attentive. Something's wrong, he said, rising quickly. Rusty doesn't act like that unless there's trouble. They hastily packed the remains of their picnic, and Yates helped Valerie negotiate the path down the ridge at a much faster pace than they had ascended. As they neared the ranch yard, they could hear shouting and see men running toward the barn. Charlie Mendoza met them at the bottom of the path, his expression grim. Fire in the north pasture, boss. Looks deliberate. The hands are saddling up now. Yates's face hardened. Get my horse ready? How bad is it? Wind's blowing it toward the winter grazing land. If we don't stop it, we could lose the whole north section. Hanson gang? Yates asked tersely. Charlie nodded. Likely. 2 riders spotted heading east about an hour ago. Yates turned to Valerie, conflict evident in his face. I'm sorry, I need to go, she interrupted. I understand. What can I do to help? Relief and gratitude flashed in his eyes. Stay here with Cookie. We'll be back as soon as we can. Within minutes, Yates and half a dozen ranch hands were galloping toward a plume of smoke visible on the northern horizon. Left behind, Valerie felt helpless and worried. Cookie appeared at her side. They know what they're doing, miss. Fire's a rancher's worst nightmare, but they've fought them before. Is there anything we can prepare? Water? Bandages? The cook nodded approvingly. Now that's thinking practical. Come on to the house, we can get some supplies ready. For the next 2 hours, Valerie helped Cookie prepare for the men's return, boiling water for burns, tearing strips of clean cloth for bandages, and assembling a meal that could be eaten quickly. The activity helped keep her mind from dwelling too much on the dangers Yates might be facing. Who are the Hanson gang? She asked as they worked. Mr. Vance mentioned them when I first arrived in Promise Creek. They were the ones who robbed the stagecoach. Cookie's round face darkened. Bad bunch, led by Jack Hanson, who fancies himself some kind of outlaw king. They steal cattle, rob stages, cause trouble all through this territory. Sheriff's been after them for months, but they're slippery as eels. Why would they target Mr. Vance's ranch specifically? Yates testified against one of their members last year, got him sent to prison in Laramie. Hansons don't forget that kind of thing. Cookie shook his head grimly. They've been making trouble ever since stealing cattle, cutting fences. This fire's just their latest try. The sound of horses returning drew them outside. The men looked exhausted and smoke-stained, but there were no obvious injuries. Valerie's eyes sought out Yates immediately, relief washing over her when she saw him dismounting. Apparently unharmed, though his clothes and face were blackened with soot. How bad? Cookie called. Could have been worse, Charlie answered. Lost about 10 acres of grazing land, but we stopped it before it reached the winter pasture. Johnson's got a bad burn on his arm. The rest of us are just singed and smoky. Valerie approached the injured ranch hand. Let me see, she said with calm authority. I've had some experience with burns. Johnson, A young man barely out of his teens looked embarrassed but extended his arm, revealing an angry red burn along his forearm. "Let's get this cleaned and wrapped," Valerie said, leading him toward the house. "It doesn't look too deep, but we'll need to prevent infection." Inside, she efficiently cleaned the burn with boiled water, applied a soothing salve Cookie provided, and wrapped it in clean bandages. Johnson endured the treatment stoically, though she could tell it was painful. "Thank you, madam," he said when she had finished. "That feels better already." "Keep it clean and have Dr. Wilson look at it when you go into town," Valerie instructed. "Burns can be tricky." When she emerged from the house, she found Yates waiting on the porch. His face now washed clean of soot, though his clothes still bore evidence of the fire. "You're good with injuries," he observed. "Basic first aid was part of my training," Valerie explained. "Teachers often have to deal with scraped knees and minor accidents." "I'm sorry about our outing," Yates said, genuine regret in his voice. "This isn't how I planned for the day to go." "There's no need to apologize. Emergencies happen." She studied his face, noting the lines of fatigue around his eyes. "Are you all right?" "Just tired," he assured her, "and angry. The Hansons could have caused much more damage if we hadn't caught the fire early. They're getting bolder. Cookie told me about your history with them. Will they try again?" Yates's jaw tightened. "Probably. But Sheriff Ellis is forming a posse. There's been too much trouble lately, the stagecoach robbery that caught you, cattle thefts from 3 different ranches, and now this fire. People have had enough." Valerie felt a chill at the implication. "Will you join the posse?" "I have to," Yates said simply. "The Hansons won't stop until they're caught." The thought of Yates facing dangerous outlaws filled Valerie with dread, but she understood his position. Out here, men had to stand together against threats to their community. "When?" she asked. "Ellis is gathering men tomorrow. We'll likely head out Monday morning." Yates ran a hand through his hair, leaving it charmingly disheveled. "I should get you back to town. The Wilsons will be wondering where you are." The return journey was quieter than the outward trip had been. The excitement and anticipation of the morning had been replaced by the sobering reality of the fire and the upcoming pursuit of the Hanson gang. Yet, Valerie found the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. The shared experience had created a bond that didn't require constant conversation. As they neared Promise Creek, Yates finally spoke. "I had something I wanted to say to you up on the ridge before we were interrupted." Valerie's pulse quickened. "Yes?" "I know it hasn't been long since we met," he began, his eyes on the road ahead. "But I've never felt this way about anyone before. There's something between us, Valerie. Something real." The simple honesty of his words touched her deeply. In Philadelphia or Boston, a gentleman might have couched such sentiments in flowery language or social niceties. Yates spoke plainly, from the heart. "I feel it too," she admitted softly. Yates glanced at her, hope and something deeper warming his eyes. "When I get back from this posse business, would you allow me to court you properly? I know you're just getting settled here, and I don't want to rush you, but—" "Yes," Valerie interrupted, surprising herself with her certainty. "I would like that very much." The smile that spread across his face was like sunshine after rain. "Good. That's good." They reached the Wilson home as evening was falling. Dr. Wilson came out to meet them, his expression concerned. "We heard about the fire," he said. "Everything all right out at your place, Yates?" "Under control," Yates assured him. "Johnson has a burn that could use your attention when he comes to town, but nothing life-threatening." "And you're joining Ellis's posse?" The doctor's tone was resigned rather than questioning. Monday morning, Dr. Wilson nodded gravely. "Be careful. The Hansons are desperate men." "I will." Yates turned to Valerie, his expression softening. "Thank you for today, despite how it ended. I enjoyed showing you the ranch." "So did I," she said sincerely. "Please be careful on Monday." "I promise." He hesitated, then, mindful of Dr. Wilson's presence, simply tipped his hat. "Good night, Valerie." "Good night, Yates." As she watched him drive away, Valerie was conscious of a mixture of emotions, happiness at the connection they had acknowledged, fear for his safety in the coming days, and a strange new certainty that whatever happened, her decision to stay in Promise Creek had been the right one. Inside, Mrs. Wilson was full of questions about the ranch, the fire, and, most importantly, any developments between Valerie and Yates. Valerie answered as honestly as propriety allowed, admitting that Yates had asked to court her formally upon his return. "I knew it," Mrs. Wilson exclaimed triumphantly. "Didn't I tell you, William? They're perfect for each other." Dr. Wilson rolled his eyes affectionately at his wife's enthusiasm, but offered Valerie a warm smile. "Yates Vance is a good man, Miss Vaughan. A bit rough around the edges, perhaps, but solid to the core." "I know," Valerie said simply. That night, preparing for bed, Valerie found herself torn between happiness and anxiety. The day had brought her closer to Yates, confirmed feelings that had been growing since their first meeting. But the threat of the Hanson gang and the dangers of the upcoming posse cast a shadow over her joy. "Please keep him safe," she whispered into the darkness, a prayer to whatever powers might be listening. "Please bring him back." Sunday passed slowly, with church services and a quiet afternoon at the Wilson home. Valerie found it difficult to concentrate on her lesson plans for the coming week, her thoughts repeatedly straying to Yates and the posse that would ride out the next morning. Monday dawned clear and cool. After a restless night, Valerie rose early and dressed for school, trying to focus on her responsibilities rather than her worries. As she was finishing breakfast, a knock at the door brought Mrs. Wilson hurrying to answer it. "Yates!" the older woman exclaimed. Come in, come in. We were just having breakfast." Valerie's heart leapt at the sound of his name. When Yates entered the dining room, she saw that he was dressed for riding, with a gun belt at his waist and determination in his eyes. "Good morning," he said, his gaze finding Valerie immediately. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Dr. Wilson assured him. "Coffee?" "Thank you, but I can't stay." "The posse is gathering at the sheriff's office in half an hour." Yates turned to Valerie. "I wanted to see you before we left." Understanding his desire for a private moment, Mrs. Wilson made a transparent excuse about checking something in the kitchen, dragging her reluctant husband along with her. Left alone, Yates stepped closer to Valerie. "I don't know how long we'll be gone," he said quietly. "The Hansons know the backcountry better than most. It could be a few days or a few weeks." Valerie nodded, trying to keep her fear from showing. "Be careful." "I will." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "I wanted you to have this, to keep until I return." He placed a simple silver ring in her palm, not an engagement ring, but something older and clearly cherished. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to her when they were courting. I've carried it with me since they died, as a kind of reminder of home." Valerie closed her fingers around the ring, deeply touched by the significance of the gesture. "I'll keep it safe for you." "I know you will." Yates hesitated, then reached out to take her free hand in his. "Valerie, I know this is sudden, and maybe it's foolish to speak before I've even properly courted you, but I need to say it before I go. From the moment I saw you standing on that street, hungry and alone but still so proud and determined, something in me recognized you, like I'd been waiting for you without even knowing it." The simple, heartfelt declaration brought tears to Valerie's eyes. "I felt it too," she whispered. "It makes no logical sense we barely know each other, but I feel as though I've known you all my life." Yates's fingers tightened around hers. "When I get back, we'll do this properly. Courtship, getting to know each other, all of it. But I wanted you to know how I feel, just in case." "Don't," Valerie interrupted, unable to bear the thought he was leaving unspoken. "You'll come back. You must." Something in her voice, in her eyes, made Yates's expression soften. With gentle deliberation, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I'll come back," he promised. "And when I do, I hope you'll consider having supper with me every night, not just on Fridays." Through her tears, Valerie managed a smile. "I think that could be arranged." A shout from outside, someone calling Yates's name, broke the moment. "I have to go," he said reluctantly. "I know." Valerie reached up impulsively and straightened his collar. her fingers lingering briefly on the solid warmth of his shoulder. "Go catch those outlaws, Yates Vance, then come home." The smile he gave her was worth every proper rule of behavior she had bent in the last week. "Yes, madam." After Yates left, Valerie found herself clutching his mother's ring, drawing strength from the tangible connection to him. She slipped it onto a ribbon and placed it around her neck, tucking it beneath her dress where it rested warm against her skin. The school day passed in a blur of activity, with Valerie going through the motions of teaching while her mind constantly wandered to Yates and the posse. The children, sensing her distraction, were unusually well behaved, a small mercy for which she was grateful. That evening, the entire town seemed subdued. With Sheriff Ellis and 8 men, including Yates, Mayor Jenkins, and several other prominent citizens, gone in pursuit of the Hanson gang, those left behind shared a collective anxiety. "They'll be fine," Mrs. Wilson assured Valerie as they prepared dinner. "Our men know what they're doing." "Of course," Valerie agreed, not entirely convinced but unwilling to voice her fears. Days passed with no news. Valerie threw herself into her teaching, developing new lessons and working individually with students who needed extra help. The routine of school, meals with the Wilsons, and lesson planning provided structure, but underneath ran a constant current of worry. On Thursday, a writer brought news to town the posse had tracked the Hanson gang to a hideout in the mountains and expected to confront them soon. The message, delivered to Deputy Parker, who had remained behind to watch the town, spread quickly through Promise Creek. "It'll be over soon," Dr. Wilson told Valerie that evening. "Ellis is too smart to rush in without a plan. They'll be careful." Another day passed, and then another. By Saturday, a full week since the posse had departed, tension in Promise Creek was palpable. Valerie found herself touching Yates's ring frequently, drawing comfort from the connection it represented. Sunday morning, as the town gathered for church services, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone outside. Sheriff Ellis led the returning posse into town, their horses tired, but their expressions triumphant. Among them rode Yates, dusty and unshaven, but wonderfully, gloriously alive. Valerie's knees went weak with relief as she watched from the church steps. As if sensing her gaze, Yates looked up, his eyes finding hers across the distance. The smile that lit his face chased away a week's worth of worry in an instant. The returning men were quickly surrounded by family and friends, eager for news. Sheriff Ellis raised his hands for quiet. "The Hanson gang is no more," he announced. "Jack Hanson and 2 of his men are dead. The remaining 3 are in custody, headed for trial in Cheyenne. The stolen goods from the stagecoach robberies have been recovered. We'll be sorting through them and returning what we can to the rightful owners." A cheer went up from the crowd. As people pressed forward with questions and congratulations, Valerie held back, waiting. Eventually, Yates extricated himself from the throng and made his way to where she stood. "You're back," she said simply, drinking in the sight of him. "I promised I would be." He looked tired but unharmed, his blue eyes warm as they met hers. "Did you keep something safe for me?" Valerie reached beneath her collar and withdrew the ribbon with his mother's ring. "It never left me." Yates smiled, reaching out to touch the ring gently. "Thank you." His hand brushed against hers, the brief contact sending warmth through her. "I need to report to the mayor and help with the recovered property, but after, Valerie agreed, understanding all he wasn't saying. "I'll be at the Wilsons'." It was late afternoon before Yates appeared at the Wilson home, freshly bathed and shaved, looking more like himself despite the lingering fatigue in his eyes. Mrs. Wilson invited him to stay for supper, an offer he gratefully accepted. During the meal, he shared details of the posse's pursuit and the final confrontation with the Hanson gang. "It was a close thing," he admitted. "They had the advantage of higher ground, but Ellis outflanked them. No one from our side was seriously hurt, thank God." After supper, Mrs. Wilson suggested with transparent intent that perhaps Valerie might like to show Yates the garden. Dr. Wilson rolled his eyes but nodded his permission, and soon Valerie found herself walking beside Yates in the evening air. "I was so worried," she confessed when they were alone. "Every day without news was torture." I thought of you constantly, Yates replied, especially during the fight. All I could think was that I had to get back to you, had to keep my promise. They reached a small bench beneath an apple tree, screened from the house by its spreading branches. Sitting close together, they were silent for a moment, simply enjoying each other's presence. Valerie, Yates finally said, taking her hand in his, I meant what I said before I left. I want to court you properly, to build something real between us. I want that too, she answered softly. It won't be easy, he warned. I have the ranch, you have the school. We both have responsibilities that will take time and energy. Valerie smiled. Nothing worthwhile is ever easy, Yates, but I think we're both accustomed to working for what matters to us. He returned her smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she had come to love. There's something else you should know, he said, his tone more serious. Among the recovered items from the stagecoach robberies, we found a trunk with the name V. Vaughan on it. Valerie gasped. My trunk? With all my belongings? The very same. Ellis has it at his office. You can claim it tomorrow. Yates watched her carefully. Which means you have your credentials, your references, everything you would need if you wanted to continue to Copper Ridge or even return east. The implication was clear. Her options had suddenly expanded. She was no longer the desperate, hungry woman who had stumbled into Promise Creek with nothing. She could choose a different path if she wished. Are you trying to get rid of me, Yates Vance? Valerie asked, a teasing note in her voice to mask the sudden flutter of anxiety his words had caused. Never, he said fervently, but I want you to stay because you want to, not because circumstances forced you to. Valerie considered her response carefully. In the short time she had been in Promise Creek, she had found purpose, community, and an unexpected chance at love. The recovery of her possessions didn't change any of that. I'm exactly where I want to be, she said firmly. Promise Creek needs a teacher, and she hesitated, then continued with newfound boldness. And I need you. The naked emotion that crossed Yates's face at her words was worth any impropriety in expressing them. Valerie, he breathed, his voice rough with feeling. Then, with deliberate slowness, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward. Their first kiss was gentle, a question and an answer all at once. Valerie felt herself respond without conscious thought, her hand rising to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they parted, Yates rested his forehead against hers for a moment, his eyes closed as if memorizing the sensation. I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you, he confessed. Even when I was dusty and half-starved, Valerie teased. Especially then. He opened his eyes, his gaze warm and intense. You were the strongest, proudest woman I'd ever seen, standing there trying to pretend you weren't about to collapse from hunger. The memory of that first meeting only 2 weeks ago, though it felt like a lifetime, brought a smile to Valerie's lips. You saved me. No, Yates corrected gently. I just bought you supper. You saved yourself, Valerie Vaughan. You always would have. The conviction in his voice touched her deeply. In her previous life, she had rarely been credited with strength or independence. That Yates saw those qualities in her, admired them rather than finding them threatening, was yet another reason she was falling in love with him. Perhaps, she acknowledged, but I'm glad I didn't have to. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. Valerie taught during the day and spent evenings with Yates whenever he could come to town. On weekends, weather permitting, he would take her to the ranch or on picnics to his favorite spots in the surrounding countryside. Their courtship, while swift by Eastern standards, was conducted with a propriety that satisfied even Reverend Cole's exacting requirements. Yates joined Valerie at church every Sunday, dined regularly with the Wilsons, and made his intentions clear to everyone in Promise Creek. October brought cooler weather and the Harvest Festival, a community celebration that Valerie threw herself into organizing, along with Mrs. Abernethy and several other town matrons. The schoolhouse was decorated with autumn leaves and corn husks. Tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes, and a local fiddler provided music for dancing. Watching her students perform recitations and songs for their proud parents, Valerie felt a deep sense of belonging. In 2 months, she had come to know every family in Promise Creek, had celebrated births and comforted bereavements, had become an integral part of the community's fabric. "You've done wonders with those children," Yates murmured, appearing at her side as the formal program concluded and the dancing began. Tommy Jenkins actually stood still for an entire recitation. His father nearly fell off his chair in shock. Valerie laughed. "Tommy has a natural gift for memorization. Once I discovered that. It was simply a matter of channeling his energy." "Dance with me," Yates offered his hand as the fiddler struck up a lively tune. "I'd be delighted." As they joined the other couples on the makeshift dance floor, Valerie caught Mrs. Wilson watching them with unconcealed satisfaction. The older woman gave her an approving nod before turning to say something to her husband, who glanced their way and smiled. "I think we're being discussed," Valerie observed, nodding toward the Wilsons. Yates chuckled. "Undoubtedly. The whole town has been placing bets on when I'll propose." His casual mention of proposal sent a flutter through Valerie's stomach, though they had acknowledged their feelings for each other and their courtship was progressing steadily. Neither had spoken concretely of marriage. "Is that so?" she managed, trying to keep her tone light. "And what are the odds?" "Most money's on Christmas," Yates replied, his eyes twinkling. "Mrs. Abernethy is convinced I'll wait until spring. Cookie has his money on Thanksgiving." "And what do you think?" Valerie asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Yates's expression softened, his steps slowing as they moved around the floor. "I think," he said quietly, "that I've known since that first night in the hotel dining room when you tried so hard to eat your stew like a proper lady despite being half-starved." Valerie's heart seemed to stop, then resume at double speed. "Known what?" "That you were the woman I wanted to spend my life with." Yates's blue eyes held hers steadily. "I just needed to convince you of it." The music ended, but neither of them moved apart. Around them, other couples separated, applauding the fiddler, but Valerie was aware only of Yates and the moment suspended between them. "Have you," she whispered, "convinced me?" A slow smile spread across his face. "I don't know. Have I?" Before Valerie could respond, Mayor Jenkins approached, clapping Yates on the shoulder. "Fine festival, isn't it? Miss Vaughan, the children's performance was exceptional. You've worked wonders with them." The moment broken, Valerie and Yates rejoined the general celebration, though something had shifted between them in acknowledgement and anticipation of what was to come. Later that evening, as Yates walked Valerie back to the Wilson home, the harvest moon hung low and golden in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet street. "I meant what I said earlier," Yates said, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "about knowing from the beginning." Valerie's pulse quickened. "So did I, about asking if you'd convinced me." Yates stopped walking, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his features were cast in silver and shadow, but his eyes were bright and intent. "And have I?" "Yes," Valerie answered simply, her heart too full for elaborate declarations. "You have." The smile that lit Yates's face was brighter than the moon above them. "Good," he said, taking her hands in his, "because I love you, Valerie Vaughan. I think I've loved you since the moment I saw you trying to stand proud despite your hunger, and every day since has only confirmed what my heart knew immediately." Tears pricked at Valerie's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I love you too, Yates, more than I thought possible." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that glinted in the moonlight. "This was my mother's," he said, holding up a simple gold band with a small diamond. "My father gave it to her when he asked her to marry him. I'd be honored if you would wear it." "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Yates Vance," Valerie whispered, though she knew the answer. "I am." He knelt before her, still holding her hand, the ring poised to slide onto her finger. "Valerie Vaughan, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Will you build a life with me, share my home, my name, my future? Will you eat beside me, not just tonight or tomorrow, but forever?" The echo of his first invitation, "Eat beside me tonight," brought fresh tears to Valerie's eyes. From that simple beginning, offering food to a hungry stranger had grown something profound and lasting. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. Yes, I will eat beside you forever, Yates Vance. He slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to his feet and gathered her into his arms. Their kiss was deeper than the gentle one they had shared in the Wilsons' garden, a promise and a pledge of all that would come. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Yates kept his arms around her. When? He asked simply. Soon, Valerie replied without hesitation. I don't need a grand wedding or elaborate preparations, just us, our friends, our community. Thanksgiving? Yates suggested. It seems fitting a day for gratitude, for acknowledging blessings. Thanksgiving, Valerie agreed, loving the symbolism of it. Cookie will be pleased to win the betting pool. Yates laughed, the sound rich and joyful in the night air. He'll be insufferable. The news of their engagement spread through Promise Creek like wildfire. By the time Valerie arrived at school the following morning, her students were already buzzing with excitement. Even Reverend Cole, who had initially been skeptical of their rapid courtship, offered his blessing. The Lord works in mysterious ways, he told Valerie after Sunday services. Sometimes he brings people together through unexpected circumstances for his greater purpose. Mrs. Wilson was ecstatic, immediately appointing herself wedding coordinator. Nothing fancy, of course, but we must have a proper ceremony and celebration. The whole town will want to attend. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving passed in a blur of preparation both for the wedding and for the joining of two separate lives. Yates began making additions to the ranch house, adding a proper parlor and expanding the kitchen to give Valerie space for her own domain. Cookie's territorial about his stove, he explained as he showed Valerie the plans, but he's agreed to share as long as you don't criticize his biscuits. I would never, Valerie promised, though both knew it was likely only a matter of time before she tactfully suggested improvements. They decided that Valerie would finish the school term, which ended mid-December, before moving permanently to the ranch. Until then, she would continue boarding with the Wilsons, with Yates coming to town as often as possible. It's only a few weeks, he said, though the longing in his eyes made it clear even that short separation would be difficult. And then we'll have the rest of our lives together. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold, with a dusting of early snow making Promise Creek look like a scene from a Christmas card. The church was decorated with evergreen boughs and late-blooming chrysanthemums, and every resident of the town and surrounding ranches had crowded into the small building to witness the union of their teacher and the respected rancher. Dr. Wilson had volunteered to give Valerie away, a role she gratefully accepted. As she waited in the small anteroom of the church, wearing a new blue dress that Mrs. Wilson and several other ladies had helped her make, she felt a curious calm. Nervous? Dr. Wilson asked, offering his arm. Surprisingly, no, Valerie answered truthfully. It feels right, as if every step I've taken in my life was leading me here. The doctor smiled warmly. That's how it should feel. Martha and I have been married 30 years, and I still think marrying her was the smartest thing I ever did. The music began, Mrs. Abernethy playing the small organ with more enthusiasm than skill, and the doors opened. Valerie took Dr. Wilson's arm and entered the church, her eyes immediately finding Yates where he stood at the altar beside Reverend Cole. He was wearing a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, but it was the expression in his eyes as he watched her approach that took Valerie's breath away. There was love there, yes, but also pride, joy, and a kind of wonder that made her heart swell with answering emotion. The ceremony itself was simple and traditional. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, exchanged rings, and were pronounced husband and wife before the entire community of Promise Creek. When Reverend Cole instructed Yates to kiss his bride, the cheer that went up from the congregation nearly raised the roof. The celebration that followed, held in the schoolhouse as the largest available space, was anything but simple. Every family had contributed to the feast: roast turkeys, hams, pies of every description, cakes, and Cookie's infamous biscuits, which everyone politely ate while avoiding eye contact with the proud cook. Toasts were offered, stories were told, some more embarrassing than others, and the fiddler played for dancing until well into the evening. Through it all, Yates kept Valerie close, his hand often finding hers, his eyes seeking her face as if to reassure himself that she was really there, really his wife. As the celebration finally began to wind down, Charlie Mendoza approached them, hat in hand. "Boss, I had the boys prepare the buggy. It's waiting whenever you're ready." Yates nodded his thanks. "Give us a few minutes to say our goodbyes." The farewells took longer than a few minutes, with everyone wanting to offer final congratulations and good wishes. Mrs. Wilson hugged Valerie tightly, tears in her eyes despite her smile. "I'm so happy for you, dear," she said, "but I'll miss having you in our home." "I'll still see you every day at school until the term ends," Valerie reminded her, "and you must visit us at the ranch often." "Oh, we will," Mrs. Wilson assured her. "Someone has to make sure you two are settling in properly." Finally, amid a shower of rice and cheers, Yates handed Valerie into the buggy and took his place beside her. The moon was rising as they drove away from town, its silver light illuminating the road to Promise Creek Ranch to home. "Happy?" Yates asked, his arm around her shoulders to ward off the evening chill. "Completely," Valerie answered, leaning into his warmth. "Though I'm still not convinced Cookie's biscuits are edible." Yates laughed, the sound of it warming her more than any physical heat could. "They grow on you, or at least, that's what we tell ourselves." They fell into comfortable silence as the buggy carried them toward their future. Valerie thought of the journey that had brought her here from Boston to Philadelphia, to the dusty road where she had stood hungry and alone, uncertain of her next step. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, noticing her pensive expression. "About how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best," she replied. "If the stagecoach hadn't been robbed, if I hadn't been desperate and hungry when I reached Promise Creek, we still would have found each other," Yates said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Valerie. I believe that with all my heart." As the ranch came into view, lamplight glowing welcomingly from the windows, Valerie felt a sense of rightness wash over her. This was where she belonged, not in Boston or Philadelphia, not even in Copper Ridge where she had originally been headed, but here, with this man. In this life, they would build together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance," Yates said softly as he helped her down from the buggy. "Home," Valerie repeated, the word rich with meaning. "I like the sound of that." He gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that belied the passion she could feel, simmering beneath the surface. "So do I," he murmured against her lips. "So do I." As Yates carried her across the threshold of their home, Valerie knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, harsh winters, difficult students, the endless work of ranch life, they would face them together. From hunger and loneliness had come fulfillment and love. From a chance encounter had grown a lifetime commitment. She had come west seeking a new beginning, and in the most unexpected way, she had found it in a small town called Promise Creek, with a blue-eyed rancher who had once bought her supper and said, in essence, if not in words, "Eat beside me forever." And she would, gladly, for all the days to come. Epilogue. Spring 1886. 10 years later. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Promise Creek ranch house, illuminating the organized chaos of breakfast time. Valerie Vance moved efficiently between the stove and the large oak table where her family gathered, pouring coffee for Yates and milk for their children. "Emma, please finish your porridge," she instructed their 8-year-old daughter, who was more interested in the book propped against her water glass than in her breakfast. "You'll be late for school." "But Ma, I'm at the good part," Emma protested, her blue eyes so like her father's pleading for understanding. "The book will still be there after school," Valerie replied, though she couldn't help smiling. Emma's love of reading was a trait she had inherited from her mother, along with her dark hair and determined spirit. "Listen to your mother," Yates said, ruffling Emma's hair as he rose from the table. "James, are you ready to help with the new calves today?" Their 10-year-old son nodded eagerly, shoveling the last of his breakfast into his mouth with enthusiasm. "Yes, sir. Charlie said I could name some of them." "Within reason," Yates cautioned, exchanging an amused glance with Valerie. James had recently gone through a phase of wanting to name all the animals after characters in the dime novels Cookie smuggled to him. 4-year-old Michael, the youngest Vance, was contentedly building a fort with his biscuit and bits of bacon, his imagination more engaged than his appetite. Valerie let him be. There would be time enough for proper table manners. For now, his creativity and joy in simple pleasures were more important. As Emma and James gathered their books and lunch pails for school, Valerie caught Yates watching her with that special smile he reserved just for her, the one that, even after 10 years of marriage, still made her heart skip. "What?" she asked, smoothing her apron self-consciously. "Just admiring my wife," he answered simply. "The most beautiful schoolteacher in Wyoming Territory." Valerie laughed. "Former schoolteacher," she corrected. "Mrs. Reynolds has that title now." It had been 8 years since Valerie had handed over the Promise Creek School to a younger woman from Denver. With 2 children and the responsibilities of the ranch, continuing to teach had become impractical. But she hadn't abandoned education entirely. She still tutored several children from outlying ranches who couldn't attend regular school, and she had established a small lending library in town that was her pride and joy. "Forever a teacher," Yates countered, pulling her into a quick embrace. "You're still teaching all of us something new every day." The simple compliment warmed her. After a decade together, Yates still found ways to make her feel cherished and appreciated. "Pa, the wagon's ready," James called from outside, interrupting the moment. "Coming," Yates called back. He pressed a kiss to Valerie's lips, then bent to ruffle Michael's hair. "Be good for your mother, buckaroo." After they had gone, Yates and James to work the ranch, Emma to school in the wagon, Yates would drive into town. Valerie settled into the peaceful rhythm of her morning routine. She cleaned up breakfast, swept the kitchen floor, and set bread dough to rise while Michael played with his wooden blocks nearby. The ranch house had expanded over the years, growing along with their family. What had once been a simple 2-room cabin was now a comfortable home with a proper kitchen, dining room, parlor, and bedrooms for each of the children. Yates had added a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides of the house, providing a pleasant place to sit on summer evenings. Cookie still ruled the bunkhouse kitchen, feeding the half-dozen ranch hands who now worked for Yates, but he had grudgingly ceded the main house cooking to Valerie years ago. He still brought his notorious biscuits for Sunday dinner, a tradition that had become a family joke. Promise Creek Ranch had prospered over the decade, growing from 100 head of cattle to nearly 500, with expanded grazing lands and improved breeding stock. Yates's careful management and forward-thinking investments had made them comfortable, if not wealthy. Promise Creek itself had grown too, not dramatically, but steadily. The railroad had finally come through 3 years ago, bringing new opportunities and connecting the town more directly to the wider world. Dr. Wilson had retired, passing his practice to a younger physician, though he and Martha still lived in town and were frequent visitors to the ranch. As Valerie kneaded the bread dough, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this life. Sometimes it seemed impossible that the hungry, desperate young woman who had stumbled into Promise Creek could have become the person she was now, wife, mother, respected member of the community, mistress of a successful ranch. Yet the connection between that past self and her present life was unbroken. The strength and determination that had driven her west, that had kept her standing proud despite her hunger and fear, were the same qualities that had helped her build this life with Yates. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Wiping her hands on her apron, Valerie went to answer it, Michael trailing curiously behind her. Charlie Mendoza stood on the porch, hat in hand. Still Yates's foreman after all these years, Charlie had become like family, the uncle her children adored for his stories, and the peppermint sticks he always seemed to have in his pockets. "Morning, Mrs. Vance," he greeted her. "Boss around?" "He and James went to check on the new calves in the north pasture," Valerie replied. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly." Charlie smiled and stepped aside, revealing an older woman standing behind him, her posture straight despite her years, her clothing travel worn but neat. "Hello, Valerie," the woman said, her voice carrying the refined accent of the East. Valerie's hand flew to her mouth in shock. "Mrs. Harrington? Elizabeth Harrington, Valerie's former employer in Philadelphia, nodded. I hope I'm not intruding. I've been trying to find you for quite some time. No, not at all. Please come in. Valerie ushered the older woman inside, her mind racing with questions. Charlie, would you mind finding Yates and telling him we have a visitor? After Charlie had departed, Valerie led Mrs. Harrington to the parlor, still stunned by her unexpected appearance. Can I offer you tea? Coffee? You must be exhausted from your journey. Tea would be lovely. Thank you. Mrs. Harrington settled onto the sofa, her eyes taking in the comfortable, lived-in quality of the room, the bookshelves filled with well-read volumes, the children's toys neatly stacked in a corner, the quilt Valerie had made draped over a rocking chair. As Valerie prepared the tea, her thoughts whirled. She hadn't heard from anyone in Philadelphia since leaving, her letters to the Harrington family having gone unanswered. What could have brought her former employer all the way to Wyoming after all this time? Returning with the tea tray, Valerie found Mrs. Harrington charming Michael, who was showing her his favorite wooden horse with solemn pride. You have a beautiful family, the older woman observed as Valerie poured the tea. Your husband must be very proud. We both are, Valerie replied, wondering how Mrs. Harrington knew about her family. Mrs. Harrington, forgive my directness, but I'm puzzled by your visit. It's been 10 years since I left Philadelphia. The older woman sighed, setting down her teacup. I owe you an apology, Valerie, a significant one. When you left to take the teaching position in the West, my husband intercepted your letters. He was displeased by your departure, felt it reflected poorly on our family. Valerie remembered Mr. Harrington's cold anger when she had given notice, his accusation that she was abandoning her responsibilities to his children for selfish reasons. I had a contract with the school board in Copper Ridge, she said carefully. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. I know that now. Mrs. Harrington's expression was regretful. My husband passed away 3 years ago. Among his papers, I found your letters, all of them, unopened. I read them then and was dismayed to learn what had happened to you on your journey. The stagecoach robbery. Valerie's arrival in Promise Creek instead of Copper Ridge, it was all ancient history now, but hearing that her letters had been deliberately withheld stirred old emotions. When I wrote to Copper Ridge, they had no record of you ever arriving, Mrs. Harrington continued. I've spent the past 2 years trying to discover what became of you. The detective I hired finally traced you here. She reached into a reticule and withdrew an envelope. This is long overdue, but I wanted to deliver it personally. Valerie accepted the envelope, opening it to find a substantial bank draft along with a letter of reference dated 10 years earlier. Mrs. Harrington, this isn't necessary. I've built a good life here. It's your final wages, plus interest, and the bonus I'd always intended to give you for your exemplary service to my children. Mrs. Harrington's voice was firm. My husband's actions were unconscionable. This is a small attempt to right that wrong. Before Valerie could respond, the front door opened and Yates entered, removing his hat as he stepped into the parlor. Charlie said we have a visitor, he began, then paused, taking in the scene. Yates, this is Mrs. Elizabeth Harrington, my former employer from Philadelphia, Valerie introduced them. Mrs. Harrington, my husband, Yates Vance. Recognition flickered in Yates's eyes. Valerie had told him about her time with the Harrington family. He stepped forward, extending his hand. Madam, it's a long way from Philadelphia to Promise Creek. Indeed it is, Mr. Vance, but some journeys are worth making. Mrs. Harrington shook his hand, her gaze assessing. You have a lovely home and a beautiful family. Valerie seems very happy. I am, Valerie confirmed, moving to stand beside Yates, drawing strength from his solid presence. Happier than I ever imagined possible. Mrs. Harrington smiled, a hint of wistfulness in her expression. I can see that. Perhaps everything worked out as it should, despite my husband's interference. Over lunch, which Valerie insisted Mrs. Harrington join them for, they caught up on the past decade. Valerie learned that the Harrington children were grown now, her former charges in college or married. Mrs. Harrington had sold the Philadelphia house after her husband's death and now lived with her eldest daughter's family in Denver. That's how the detective finally found you, she explained. A merchant in Denver mentioned a lending library started by a former teacher from the East who had married a rancher near Promise Creek. It seemed too coincidental to ignore. When Michael grew restless, Yates took him outside to see the new kittens in the barn, leaving the women to talk more freely. "He's a good man, your husband," Mrs. Harrington observed after they had gone. "Nothing like the society gentleman I imagined you might marry, but I can see he makes you happy." Valerie smiled, remembering that hungry evening when Yates had first approached her on the street. "He saw me at my worst moment and offered help without judgment. Everything good in my life now started with that simple kindness." The best marriages often begin that way, with genuine seeing rather than social convenience. Mrs. Harrington's expression grew serious. "Valerie, there's another reason I wanted to find you. My youngest, Caroline, has become a teacher. She's been offered a position at a school in Laramie, but she's hesitant to accept, afraid of the unknown, the wildness of the West. I hoped you might write to her, share your experience. It might give her courage." The request touched Valerie deeply. "I'd be happy to. The West isn't for everyone, but it offers opportunities for women that simply don't exist back East. Independence, respect based on ability rather than social standing." "Exactly what Caroline needs," Mrs. Harrington agreed. "She has always been the most independent of my children, yet the most constrained by society's expectations." When Yates and Michael returned, followed shortly by James and Emma arriving home from school, the conversation turned to more general topics. Mrs. Harrington charmed the children with stories of Philadelphia and promised to send books for Emma from Denver. As evening approached, Yates offered to drive Mrs. Harrington back to town, where she was staying at the hotel before catching the eastbound train the next day. "You must come again," Valerie said as they said their goodbyes, "perhaps in the summer when the mountains are at their most beautiful. Bring Caroline, she could stay with us while she explores Laramie." "I would like that very much," Mrs. Harrington replied, embracing Valerie warmly. "Thank you for your forgiveness and your hospitality." After Mrs. Harrington had gone, the family settled into their evening routine supper, stories for the children, then bedtime. When the house was finally quiet, Valerie joined Yates on the porch, where he sat enjoying the evening air. "What a day," she said, sinking into the chair beside him. "I never expected to see anyone from my Philadelphia life again." Yates took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Valerie said thoughtfully. "It was unsettling at first, like having a ghost from the past appear. But in the end, it felt like closure. A chapter finally completely finished." "And the money?" Yates asked. They had never been in need, but the bank draft Mrs. Harrington had brought represented a substantial sum. Valerie smiled. "I was thinking we might use it to expand the lending library. Perhaps build a proper building instead of using the back room of the general store. Promise Creek has grown enough to support it." "Always the teacher," Yates teased gently, bringing her hand to his lips. "I think that's a fine idea." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Finally, Valerie spoke again, her voice soft with reflection. 10 years ago today, I was standing on a dusty street, hungry and alone, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life coming west." She turned to look at Yates, her eyes shining in the fading light. "And then you bought me supper and asked me to eat beside you." "Best question I ever asked," Yates replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Though, will you marry me? Comes in a close second." Valerie laughed, leaning over to kiss him. "I've been eating beside you ever since, Yates Vance, and I plan to continue for at least another 50 years. "That sounds about right," he agreed, pulling her gently from her chair onto his lap. 50 years minimum. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Valerie thought about the long, unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment, from Boston to Philadelphia, to the desperate hunger of that day in Promise Creek, and then through 10 years of building a life, a family, a home with the man who had seen her true self from the very beginning. It hadn't always been easy. There had been harsh winters, difficult pregnancies, financial worries, the normal conflicts that arise between two strong-willed people sharing a life. But through it all had run the golden thread of their love for each other, their commitment to the life they were creating together. From hunger to fulfillment, from aloneness to family, from uncertainty to purpose, the transformation seemed almost miraculous when viewed from the perspective of a decade. Yet, it had happened one day at a time, one choice at a time, beginning with that first simple invitation to share a meal. "I love you," Valerie whispered, resting her head against Yates's shoulder. "I love you too," he answered, his arms tightening around her. "Forever." And as the first stars winked to life in the Wyoming sky, Valerie Vance gave silent thanks for stagecoach robbers, dusty roads, and the blue-eyed cowboy who had bought her supper and changed her life with 7 simple words. "Eat beside me tonight, Miss Vaughan." She had and she would for all the days to come.